Hey everyone, so I was on vacation this week and caught a few movies, and I figured I'd just share some thoughts about them. So, first up is Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. This is not a good movie, and I can explain why in just three quick categories. So, first, the characters. It's not just how the characters themselves are, it's how they get along with each other. So, first up are Jill and Wesker. Jill is supposed to be a member of this elite fighting force called STARS, and yet, in the scene in which she's introduced to us, she pulls her firearm in the middle of a crowded cafe, and she's going to use live ammo to perform a trick shot where is she going to shoot a ketchup dispenser that's balancing on the head of someone who is sleeping. So nothing says member of elite fighting force like reckless endangerment. So yeah, this person probably should not be on any kind of law enforcement. Second of all, just to hammer home that she is Jill, they give her a Jill sandwich reference. More on why references are such a problem in this movie in the third part. And then the third thing about her is that she bizarrely has feelings for Wesker. I can only presume they did this to try to make Wesker's betrayal be more personal to her, but other than that, it was completely unnecessary. Anyone who's familiar with the source material knows why this is so wrong for so many reasons. So that brings us to Wesker. In the original game, he was, I believe, head of security for Umbrella. And so when he leads Star into the mansion, he's basically leading his team into a meat grinder. It's a horrible betrayal, did not need to be rewritten, and yet for some reason they decided to water it down because in this movie, he's not a member of Umbrella. In fact, he works for some outside organization that's looking to steal secrets from Umbrella. So essentially, he's just engaging in corporate espionage. And the thing is, he didn't even need to betray his team because it's one thing when you're working for the enemy. Here, what happens is he receives a tip saying that Raccoon City is going to be destroyed. There's no reason why he couldn't have gone off and done his thing while alerting Stars and says, get out of town. He could have done both. They're not mutually exclusive because he's not working for Umbrella and he could still save his team. There's no reason why he had to choose one or the other. But for whatever reason, they couldn't think of that, and so he betrays them and doesn't let them know until the very end that the town is going to be destroyed. So complete unnecessary rewrite, and it just created problems rather than solving problems. However, they then decide to make him more murderous because in the middle of trying to steal the virus, he then commits a double murder. So first they watered down the character only to jack him back up. So I don't know why they thought it was necessary. They could have just left him as a member of Umbrella. So that brings us to the next two characters, Claire and Chris. For whatever reason, they decided to rewrite these characters as well. Chris basically treats Claire like she's the wayward child, that she is a deadbeat. He mentions to her something about, oh, are you here for money? You'd only say that to someone if there's like a pattern of them doing that. So for whatever reason, they decide to make Claire either be a deadbeat or at least she's perceived to be a deadbeat by her brother. And even little things like her motorcycle. The motorcycle isn't hers, it's his, and she swipes it from him. So for whatever reason, they decided to take everything away from this character. And then that brings us to Leon. In the original games, Leon was a rookie. And rookies make mistakes, but they make this character outright incompetent. Kind of like Jill, this guy should not be part of law enforcement. They overtly make a comment about how his father is well connected and so keeps cleaning up after his messes. Okay, so having mentioned Leon and his incompetence, that leads us into the second category, which are how these scenes just don't work in the movie. And the first one I want to talk to is where Leon is sitting at the front desk of the police station. He's told to man the desk. Front doors are wide open, and here they recreate a scene from the second game where the truck tips over and explodes. So he's sitting at the front desk. The front doors are wide open. The truck tips over, slides up to the front door, and explodes. And yet, he does not see, hear, or feel this because he's wearing headphones. So apparently, the headphones don't just, blot out the sound of the explosion. And if they do, I want those headphones because they've got some serious active noise cancellation. He doesn't feel the concussive force of an explosion, and he doesn't see the flash of the explosion. It is just such a dumb scene for so many reasons. And then what should have been really harrowing is then you have an escalation where the driver it comes out of the truck. He's obviously a zombie now. He's in flames. He's walking to Chris. So he's walking through the entryway towards Chris, and they're playing some pop song. I'm sure someone will know who it is, and maybe there's like a reference in the lyrics or something like that. But why would you do that? Why would you take this scene should have been one of the more harrowing scenes in the movie. It really established just how unrelenting these zombies could be. That they're on fire and they just keep coming, this kind of unrelenting threat. Instead they take the wind out of the sails and that they have this zombie walking around to some pop song. Once again, they're trying to reinforce just how incompetent and incapable Leon is, and at the same time they take the wind out of they take the wind out of the sails of what should have been a harrowing scene. How does your movie recover from that? In my opinion, it can't. Because this should have been terrifying and there was nothing about it. And again, that's like a reference that they're making. I'm not familiar with the song itself, but I presume it's something from the 90s, which is why they used it. And then there's just other scenes like that. That's probably the most egregious of them. But so many of these scenes feel like a standalone scene. They don't feel like part of a progression. It's like you see this person in this room, this person in this room. It doesn't really feel like a progression to me. And then the third category are the references. And I get that this movie takes place in the 90s, so some of the technological reference are going to make sense, but at a certain point, it's just like they're holding up a checklist and saying, "Do you remember all these things?" And now that you do, have feelings about these things. And that rather than having content, they're relying on you, the audience, to project onto the movie the things that you feel about these various things that they're going to mention. And so, like with the Jill sandwich, that's really from the fandom. Yes, the line is in the original game. And on a side note, I remember playing this game. I was so broke. This was the only game I could afford, and I played this game again and again and again and again. And honestly, that line never resonated with me. To me, it was just another terrible line in a game filled with terrible lines. Yes, I really enjoyed the game, but I could also admit that it had terrible writing and terrible acting. It was just another line, but because it became an internet meme, suddenly it has to become part of the canon. And you have to be careful of that because fandom can be very derivative and it can change what the actual source material is trying to do. But then there's another scene where someone is going off on a tirade. And in like 2 seconds, 2 sentences, excuse me, they must make half a dozen 90s references. But the funny thing is, back then, someone wouldn't have said those things. The way the line is presented, it's something you would say now if you're making fun of the 90s, if you're trying to make this kind of comical summary of what it was like to be in the 90s. But in the 90s, someone would not have said that. It is just like so over the top. And again, it's like, okay, waiting for them to mention this. Yay, they mentioned Blockbuster. Yay, they mentioned this movie or whatever. So it's like there's a self awareness that just doesn't exist within a given generation. So I think that's about it. So the characters are just completely wrong. The scenes just don't work. They put a lot of unnecessary references. Again, there's other scenes where there's a song playing that really didn't have to play, but they wanted to remind you it was the 90s. So yeah, this was not a great movie. And again, if you're not familiar with the source material, would you like this movie anymore? I don't think so because the other source problems are there, that it's just yet another zombie movie. There's no defining style to this, I would say. It feels minimalistic, not because they're going for a stylistic choice, but apparently they just didn't have the budget for it, which I don't understand why, because Resident Evil, at least the video games, seem to be at the top of their game, no pun intended. We've had 4 games in 4 years. But yeah, the overall movie just felt and looked really kind of cheap, except for the ending. The ending boss was okay, but even that scene was very stilted, very wooden. It didn't really feel like an action or horror scene. Anyway, so that's about it. So, if you saw this movie and you enjoyed it, great. I hope you do. I only saw this just recently. It became available as rental on Amazon, so that's how I saw it. And that's about it. So, like I said, this isn't the normal content for this channel. This is me just kind of talking off the cuff. And you'll see more normal content as everyone returns back to college, college classes in the next few weeks. Anyways, please enjoy the holidays if that is something that you celebrate.